Europe really does carry a striking share of the world's cancer burden. In the global estimates for the reference year used here, there were about 20.6 million new cancer cases worldwide and 9.8 million cancer deaths. And according to the Cancer Atlas, Europe accounts for only around 9% of the world's population, yet roughly 22% of new cancer cases and about 20% of cancer deaths. In the European Union alone, the European Cancer Information System estimated around 2.7 million new cancer cases and about 1.3 million deaths in 2024. Those numbers are real, but they do not point to one single new cause. The most careful reading is more complicated and more interesting. Europe's high burden reflects three things happening at once. Europe is older. Europe is better at finding and recording cancer. And Europe also has genuinely unfavorable exposure to several well-established cancer risks. That first point matters more than people often realize. Absolute case numbers are not the same thing as underlying risk. Cancer is strongly linked to age. The longer people live, the more time there is for the biological damage behind many cancers to accumulate, and the more diagnoses you will inevitably see. So a region with older populations and longer life expectancy will produce more cancer cases even before we ask whether anything unusual is causing them. This is why fair comparisons rely on age-standardized rates. Age standardization adjusts for differences in population age structure. Without it, an older region can look intrinsically sicker when it may simply be older. That is a basic methodological point, but it is essential here. Europe's cancer burden looks high partly because Europe has many older societies. The second factor is visibility. Europe has dense cancer registries and broad access to diagnostics, pathology, imaging, follow-up, and statistical capture. In simple terms, cancer is more completely seen. If someone develops cancer in a setting with regular medical contact, laboratory confirmation, imaging, and a functioning registry, that case is much more likely to appear in official numbers than in a place where people die without a diagnosis or without a formal record. A recent global analysis supports that point very strongly. It found very low shares of undiagnosed fatal cancer in Western Europe and extremely high shares in parts of Africa. That means some regions can appear healthier on paper, partly because cancer is less often detected and classified. So when Europe looks heavily burdened, some of that difference is indeed statistical in the broad sense, not fake, but made more visible by stronger diagnosis and registration. There is another layer to this. Better screening and diagnostics can push incidence upward by finding cancers earlier, shifting diagnoses forward in time, and in some cases, detecting cancers that might never have caused symptoms during a person's lifetime. That is the problem known as overdiagnosis. So more diagnoses are not automatically bad news. Sometimes they reflect a health system that is finding disease sooner and potentially improving survival. But the story does not end there, because the evidence also argues against the idea that Europe's high burden is just a counting artifact or just a screening effect. When researchers look at age-standardized rates, at the pattern of different cancer types, and at differences within Europe itself, they still see real variation in risk. In other words, Europe is not simply better at paperwork. The internal European pattern is revealing. Incidence tends to be higher in Northern and Western Europe, while mortality is often higher in Eastern Europe. That split suggests a mix of influences, different exposure patterns, different levels of early detection, different treatment access, care pathways, and wider differences in health system quality. If this were only about registration, you would not expect such meaningful contrasts between who gets diagnosed and who dies. And high deaths matter. If a region shows elevated burden in cancers with clear risk factors and substantial mortality, that weakens the idea that screening alone explains the picture. Europe's burden includes cancers such as lung cancer, liver cancer, and certain head and neck cancers. These are not trivial statistical artifacts. They are strongly connected to established exposures. The biggest avoidable cause remains tobacco. The World Health Organization describes the European region as especially burdened by smoking and likely to continue performing poorly in tobacco prevalence. Tobacco is still the largest avoidable cause of cancer in the EU. That alone helps explain a meaningful share of Europe's burden, especially for lung cancer, but also for several other sites. Alcohol is another major contributor, and it is often underestimated in public discussion. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies alcohol as carcinogenic, and the WHO says it causes at least 7 types of cancer. Europe is also described by WHO as the world region with the highest alcohol consumption. That matters enormously when trying to understand why cancer remains so common here. One EU estimate concluded that even light to moderate alcohol consumption may have caused almost 23,000 new cancer cases in a single year. That should be treated exactly as it is presented here. One estimate, not a definitive total. But it does underline the scale of the issue. If a region combines high alcohol consumption with an aging population and strong detection systems, its cancer burden will look high because it is high. And alcohol and tobacco are not the whole story. Cancer trends are explicitly non-monocausal. Other established contributors include obesity, physical inactivity, some dietary patterns, air pollution, radon, ultraviolet exposure, infections, and occupational carcinogens. Different countries combine these risks in different ways, which is one reason Europe cannot be reduced to a single explanation. It is also important to be careful with the word Europe. People often mix together the geographic continent, the EU 27, and the WHO European region as if they were the same thing. They are not. They have different denominators, different age structures, different health systems, and different risk profiles. So any claim about Europe needs to be checked against the exact data set and definition being used. There is a second source criticism point. Burden datasets such as Globocan, the Cancer Atlas, and ECIS are designed to map cases and deaths. They are not designed to identify individual causality. They can show that the burden is high. They cannot, by themselves, prove what specific event or exposure caused it. That matters in the current climate because some people look at high cancer numbers in the 2020s and jump straight to the claim that there must be a single new cause since 2021, including COVID vaccination. The evidence summarized here does not support that inference. Globocan, the Cancer Atlas, and ECIS do document a high burden, but they do not have the causal design needed to attribute that burden to a new post-2021 cause. More plausible explanations are already on the table and well supported. Aging populations, classic risk factors such as tobacco and alcohol, better registration and diagnosis, and also pandemic-related screening and diagnostic delays, which could affect when cancers were found. So, the overall picture is not mysterious, even if it is still troubling. Europe has a high cancer burden, partly because it is older and because it counts cancer more completely. But it also has real exposure problems, especially with smoking and alcohol, alongside obesity, inactivity, environmental exposures, infections, and occupational risks. Better screening can raise incidence figures without meaning things are getting worse. Yet the continued weight of deaths and the pattern of specific cancers show that this is not just a statistical illusion. The most balanced conclusion is therefore the least sensational one. Europe's high cancer burden is real, but it does not demonstrate one new hidden cause. It reflects demography, detection, and established risks acting together. If you want, subscribe, enable notifications, and suggest the next topic in the comments.